Well, I got to tell you, I was quite a vegetable last night. I had 4 days of training.
How long has it been since you've done that? Just 4 straight days.
4 straight days of training. Look, I mean, I've done train launches, um, which effectively is a four straight day. Um, so I know what I feel like after a train launch, and that's basically how I felt. As I was hanging about for a couple of hours at the end of the day, just going, I'll keep talking and we can talk about the things we don't have time to talk about in the room. And then I'd go to dinner and people would come to dinner. So it was really just on from 8 a.m. to 8:39 p.m. And then get back to the hotel room and be lights out by 9:30, as opposed to my normal lights out about 1 a.m. So I got to last night, the adrenaline started to trickle away. I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I'd really love that course if it was constructed with the right pedagogy.
I'm so proud of it.
I just and I caught myself again this week. You know, the whole sort of leading safe, hit the rewind button, implementing safe. And you get the people in leading safe who are actually, you know, they're a fair way down the track. They've done leading safe before. They're, you know, in the thick of things looking for the next level. And they want the advanced version of the leading safe where you go off piste and you add to it. But every time you do that, you're stealing some content from implementing safe. It's that whole, you get to implementing safe. It's, oh, yeah, we've had this chat.
Yeah. I need to look at where leading safe is today, because I actually haven't taught it now I haven't taught it by the book as intended probably for 2.5 years, 3 years. I taught it in modified executive leading safe format to Fortune 50 CIO and his leadership team with Cheryl.
Yeah.
And that was delightful. Like, it had just the right concepts to drive all the right conversations, and we were able to skip all the wrong slides. But there was a brief moment, and I think it was 5.0-ish, where leading safe and implementing safe had a beautiful set of two journeys that fit together so well. And it was like, and I basically treated it as, here's the journey of the competencies, here's the journey of the implementation roadmap.
Yeah.
And that became my guiding storyline for the class. And then 2 of the competencies got shrunk down to a slide each or whatever. And
look, there's a big rebalance. They've rebalanced a lot of the courses for version 6.
Yeah, I don't actually have access to most of the courses now because we dropped our gold partnership. I don't have any licenses.
Yeah, the old buy a license. Yeah, 6, like the solution module's gone. And they've ripped a lot out of kind of develop on cadence, release on demand, and DevOps components of the module that was kind of the bulk of day 2. And portfolios, it's kind of a 40-minute cameo. Strategy and investment funding, as opposed to lean governance and portfolio ops. So it's a very different flow and weighting of where you spend your time than it was. I think I like it. I think I like it as a tweak from the last version of the version 5 leading safe.
Yeah. Cool.
So, But it's the old, here's a link to a blog post, here's a link to a video, here's a link to a Miro, here's a link to a guide, and whatever you do, don't read any of them until you've finished passing your exam.
Summarizes it up, yeah. And I was thinking, and not in a deep enough way to have answers, but just kind of the realization that we haven't changed how SPCs are certified structurally since there were SPCs.
Yeah.
Since I was an SPC.
Yeah.
Before there were SPCTs, and it's like it kind of doesn't make sense anymore. Like at any level.
It's weird now, and it's kind of you look at it and you go, I mean, back in those early days with the SPC course, they really, in 4 days, you pretty much got everything SAFE had to offer. You know, you could.
In fact, there was a little bit that felt like it was filler material.
Well, yeah.
Like, because we used to have a 3/4 of a day free.
Yep.
So we took the test and made it. Did you take the test when it was in the class?
Yeah, well, I did the first SPC class, so we had.
Okay, so you did the written test with the essays.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
3 hours on the final morning. Goodness knows how many long essays and short essays and a few multi-choices. And certainly the first few I taught were when it was, you know, we'd moved to multi-choice, but it was proctored in the class, which fundamentally meant nobody was thinking about anything except the exam by the time you got to day 3.
Yeah.
So you taught an extended, deep leading SAFE, and then you taught some stuff about implementing, but nobody was listening because they were all panicking about passing the exam the next morning. And really all they wanted to do was talk about prep for the exam and can we do Q&A as part of our prep for the exam.
Yeah, because that's right. The implementing back then was really just a deep dive into additional topics. It didn't have the roadmap.
No.
I mean, I love teaching the roadmap as a thing. I almost would think it just needs to be its own 2-day class.
Well, and
figure out how to make SPCs come other way.
That's what I do, right? I'd switch the roadmap to be the one, like the whole course is follow the roadmap. And
but how do you teach the basics of SAFE? You just weave it in.
Look, I think you weave a bit in, but you also, you know, you get a bit stronger about the prerequisites. You know, by the time you're going to spend that much money coming to a 4-day course, do the pre-work, do the prereqs, watch the videos. I don't know, something to deal with the basics, because I actually think, to be honest, you could cover a lot of the basics anyway. Like if you think about, let's say, principles and values. Well, principles and values fit quite neatly in reaching the tipping point. So you could weave them in pretty happily, and reaching the tipping point is mindset, principles, values, and then going from perhaps a lot of the flow principles straight into the value stream identification stuff. You'd get a really nice flow out of it. The argument always was leading SAFE was the anchor course. And so you had to do the exemplar leading SAFE. That's what was taught most. That was the intro course. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think, you know, for leadership, for senior leadership, a lot of them are steering towards the LPM course instead of steering towards a leading SAFE, or they're using the SAFE executive workshop in a extended form. leading safe is far more sitting as we're going to launch a train course now than it is the leadership oriented training that it was back when you just sprinkle it around the organization like fairy dust.
I would argue it hasn't changed positioning, but the reach of safe has changed. Therefore, we're starting off in a flight level higher. Because early on, like most of the first trains were kind of my first safe adoption. Several of them were not company level. They were, here's a big program that needs to move forward.
So I used to use leading safe really aggressively across the executive. I can remember literally, I'd never, well, I'd often put a CIO through it, but I wouldn't try and put extended C-suite through a leading safe.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as you come down a layer, I remember looking at quite a few organizations. I'd look at the whole org chart of the executive and it'd be like, okay, what percentage of them have we got now? And we just roll them all through leading safe. Talk the language, understand the journey we're going on.
Yeah, and I think for me it would get there, but like I don't know, maybe it's a scale thing, maybe it's an industry thing, but in insurance especially, but also like across the CA product group, I really took it large value stream by large value stream.
Yeah,
which could arguably be portfolio by portfolio, but it was value stream leadership, and then all of the like awareness a level up was tended to be verbal or a modified set of content that maybe arguably was leading safe.
Right. So we were using it, I think a lot of the time we were using it to get into the system of work.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what caused the kind of go far and wide was let's talk a little bit beyond awareness. It's, what are the things we're wanting to change in the system of work? How do we start the conversation about that? And that's where I think, again, probably, I mean, this was back when I was doing surgery on it. I was teaching portfolio program team as my cycle.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dean's original metaphor where it was scale up once, scale up twice. And so you teach the team content, then the program content, then the portfolio. And every time a new leading safe came out, I'd spend 2 days doing surgery on the slides. I want to teach portfolio program team because it's the flow that feels right. So we'd have a lot of quite deep portfolio discussions.
Right. That's back, but that's been a minute because do you still do surgery?
No, I stopped doing surgery a while ago. It was, I don't know, it hit a point where it beat me. And I think part of it was their polish of the natural flow of the slides got good enough that the surgery was an awful lot of work. Because you used to be able to do the surgery just by reordering slides mostly.
So yeah, you're above water.
Yes. Yeah.
Excellent.
We got lucky. We definitely got lucky. Are you guys streaming right now?
We are.
You're on air. Yes.
So we were. We were chewing the fat on the way, leading safe and the various safe courses and things have changed over the years, and particularly SPC, and where it sits in life, how little it's changed given how long it's been.
Do you feel that it has not changed that much? I feel like from when I started using safe in the 3.0 era to now, there are some pretty substantive changes in well, okay, you know what? I take back what I said. There's a lot of details changes, but broad strokes, the structure of the class has never changed. And you could argue that you could probably still teach the 3.0 version and talk to the differences in the current version and people would still pass the exam.
Look,
That's an interesting perspective.
the leading safe plus bolt-ons, I mean, that's never changed. We figured out that it was the introduction of the roadmap that was the first big change. Moving away from the proctored exam was a flip. The implementation roadmap was a flip. But
the conversation started out with an observation that how we create SPCs has not changed ever, despite the rest of the framework growing so big. That was really the genesis, and it moved into talking about implementing pretty quickly.
Well, I can see how you immediately jumped into the implementing class from there. But that is also a very interesting observation, that the path to creating SPCs has not changed. Well, I think we kind of talked about it a little bit last week too, that their purpose behind creating SPCs has always been to encourage more trainings. Right. As much as we in transformation use SPCs to guide transformation, SAFE's goal has always been sell more training classes.
I'd be fascinated to see where leading safe sits in the mix now. Like, I know there was a point in time where arguably leading safe was probably 90% plus of the license sales in terms of where it sat in the mix of the way people use courses. I'd be fascinated to see where it sits in today's mix.
If I had to guess, I would think LPM is still number one, implementing is number two, and then I would bet RTE is number three, and leading is probably right around there at number four, but only because I don't think that any of the other classes have a very significant demand. They're more taught as one-offs or part of a larger transformation effort, whereas leading safe people use as an intro to safe.
I certainly know, like, you can see the SPC course struggling with its portfolio content. It's like, go to LPM. It's you know, they add a bit of a recover on LPM as part of the implementing bit, but it's still by and large here are the core elements of lean portfolio management. You should go and do the LPM course.
Yeah, and then I feel guilty every time I say that because I don't think the LPM course gets into enough detail either.
Wow,
and
yeah,
it
there
feels
is
like
that.
we're lying to students about it. But yes, all right, carry on.
Well, it's that question of just how much there is in the framework now that, you know, if you're thinking about an SPC course, there's almost nothing from large solution in it. The LPM content is really a teaser for the LPM course. The DevOps content has been reduced to near
4
zero.
slides.
Right? It's literally like 15 minutes.
Yeah. You just taught it, right, Mark?
Yeah. And that's kind of what it's all fresh in my head at the moment.
Yeah, I taught it last week, and I remember thinking this latest change with 6.0, where you just squeeze in continuous learning culture and organizational agility in the very last lesson. and they each get like 5 slides and then you move on, it feels weird when their core competencies that we introduce in lesson 1 never talk about them again until lesson 13, and only for 10 minutes each. And there's no other place to go learn about them. You don't talk about them. There's no course for them. We don't even have, hey, go check out the LPM course.
That's, what is that? That's LAL, CLC, and org agility?
Yeah.
And I guess ESD.
So there's there's a whole new lesson that they bolted on the end. And it's basically covering the acceleration part of the implementation roadmap. It's like the lesson for acceleration. And it's got some good stuff.
And that's at the end of implementing or the end of leading?
It's now the last thing in implementing. And they kind of gave us the warning to go, hey, there's no open space anymore, and now we've added this new 3-hour module. And like, there's good stuff in it. I quite like the way that they just go back and reiterate the flow tools, and come back a little bit more deeply on the flow accelerators, because they're doing. If you think about the flow accelerators in Leading Safe, what they do with the flow accelerators in Leading Safe now is they go, we're going to talk about 3 of them. There's 8. We're going to do deeper on 3. Then in this module at the end of implementing now, they go, there's 8. We're going to talk about the 5 we didn't talk about during Leading Safe. So they're doing a bit of nice kind of jigsawing with it. But you're also you're opening it.
Subjects are in one lesson, right?
Yeah.
You jump from LAL to continuous learning culture to organizational agility to flow accelerators to flow metrics.
On the afternoon of day 4, when everybody's head is completely jammed full.
Yeah, there's no consistency. It's just like they took 5 random topics, jumped them together into one lesson, and said, talk about these things. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
So anyway, bringing the meta back. So we've got amazing approach to that now. Thank you for making it easy, Sammy. The thing I was talking about with courses that might actually be useful. If I think about the typical flow, so this would be radical for scaled agile, but I like to dream in the what if and then see what's feasible later.
Well, of course.
What if we almost explicitly acknowledged reality and renamed Leading Safe to something more like Leading Essential Safe?
Yes, that to me is the
first step.
Yeah.
So first step. Step 2, explicitly make SPC about launching release trains.
Yes.
And this would be back to are we removing capability or adding capability conversation at SBCT Day? I don't know if you're in that group, Saahil, when I did that. I don't think you were. You're talking AI.
I wasn't there, but I remember the readout.
Yeah, so I drew that picture on the whiteboard. I'm like, everybody's talking about restricting SPCs. If you're going to make an advanced SPC, you can't take away from what they have now.
Yeah.
You have to build around it and accrue. Otherwise, you're going to got a marketing nightmare waiting for you. But
doesn't that go back to the idea that we were talking about? Like, there really is a separate training SPC from a transformation SPC.
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that we could go and different paths there. But it's basically, what if the existing core pair of classes only tried to address the wrapper around Essential Safe, running it as a leader and launching it as an SPC. And then as a result, we can drop any attempt to include 3 or 4 of the competencies. We can focus on the flow metrics much more deeply, and it becomes like, here's the principles and values, here's what flow means deeply, here's the constructs and practices, and here's how you measure your success, and here's how you work with your collaborators. And then there's like a bolt-on module on leading that becomes, and here's how you work with other trains, and a hand wave at all the other stuff that might come up, like the summary.
So we also...
And then we wrap another thing around for the larger change and build a new course there.
Well, I think there's I'm going to throw 2 riffs on that. One is there's a riff that says if you refocus SPC that way, then you build a kind of SPC equivalent for LPM.
And this goes back. Well, what this does is fundamentally it creates SPC as coach at the intersection of the bottom two agendas, or flight levels, and you create a different one at the top intersection.
Yeah.
Which is already two wildly different skill sets of coaches anyway.
Yeah, it's incredibly wildly different.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting tired of the number of people I've worked with who are like, I've been to LPM, I'm ready to transform the portfolio.
Yeah.
And they have absolutely no idea how hard that is, or they have no practical experience for it. And I recognize that like an SPC version of LPM is not going to fix that issue, but it might give them more tools and give us more touch points to coach them before they go off and break everything on their
own. But it gives you time to go a lot deeper into the skill set. Like if you give yourself that kind of, if you go, there's an LPM class, but there's an SPC for LPM, much as for a long time there was an SPC for leading safe. You could really sort of amplify that. The other thing that we toyed about, though, a few years ago was, if you think about, and let's just take leading safe for the minute, there's kind of a day of it, which is principles and values, which actually is kind of a copy-paste day in a lot of courses. And if you went, you know what, I'm going to have a day which is, maybe it's lean agile leadership, right? A one-day course which is my bootstrap of, here's the safe principles, the safe core values, you know, that kind of core guts. And then you go, well, if you're launching trains, you go here. If you're launching portfolios, you go here. But you've kind of broken out of the meta to go, I've extracted some content into a one-day bootstrap course for leaders. That then frees up space and opportunity in all the specialist classes.
In some ways, we started out with role-based, and then we've actually evolved the roles in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
We got halfway to competency-based, but now we have a blend of competency-based, role-based, and random.
Arguably, the role-based are almost all at the essential level anyway. Right. And then
I don't know, product manager is arguable, architect is arguable, because it actually hits an entire slice.
Well, but I think that's also the role has evolved. Right. When those courses were created, the system architect and the product manager really just stayed in their lane and essential. And now we're realizing that's not a good approach. Is that Wolfgang joining us?
That is Wolfgang joining us. Let me
see how smooth you can make this.
I can make it very smooth, mate. Wolfgang.
Right now you're failing because you got Saahil and Wolfgang sharing a window.
Oh, I haven't hit the transition button. There you
go. Oh, we are.
We did a whole bunch of downloading on the SPC course and likes, dislikes, evolutions and devolutions, Wolfgang, just for you in the background. And then Eric was like, well, why don't we take this thread and go, what would we change or fix? And maybe we can give a gift. So part of that became a discussion about where does leading really sit in the current ecosystem of SAFE, right? Because SAFE's so big as a framework now. And Eric's proposal was, hey, you could have leading essential SAFE, which would downscope leading safe a little bit at the moment, give you back time, put some other essential stuff perhaps as an amplification in there. and that you could then take your SPC course and frame it around launching trains.
I'm probably the wrong person to speak on that, because like I'm more or less living a complete different world, because like, yeah, trains are important, but I usually don't do that anymore. Like, setting up a train is something that, how should I say? I don't want to be harsh, but it feels a bit clumsy, to be honest. Like, because a train is so slow. And so what I'm usually doing is I'm setting up these groups of like 2 to 4 teams, and then over the course of time, there is a train emerging, because there are these solution areas who want to collaborate and they want to form a release train. Now, this is much faster, and what is much more important for me is that it pays into the theory of fracture planes, because a train essentially doesn't really, how should I say, it doesn't really propel you forward to identifying fracture planes, because all you do is you're orchestrating dependencies between the teams.
So
now,
imagining a world where you were staying in the canon of safe courses.
This is hard to do. So I have an RTE course next week and the week thereafter. So let's see what I will do there. But,
you probably teach more SPC courses than the rest of us do, right? So if you think about the SPC course, and you know, let's be truthful, the SPC course right now, there ain't a lot of large solution stuff in it.
No, it's just chapter 12.2.
Right.
This is all. This is like 12 slides.
It's like, I don't even know there's 12. It felt like there were 6. Because I got to the end and I went, because, you know, we didn't even really get a chance to talk about solution intent. I flipped back and went, oh, here's a slide that has solution intent. There's not even a solution intent slide now. They've really ripped it down. There's no slide on pre and post PI planning.
And because we abandoned that, essentially, pre and post PI planning completely. So it's just a pre-plan, which is like a series of activity, but not a single meeting, like an event that we had before.
So I kind of, in teaching that bit, I went, if you're interested in this stuff, there's a guy called Wolfgang Brandhuber who gets very excited by it. Go to Safe Studio, watch his talk that he gave in Prague, and then drop him a line, and he would love to chat to you until you're blue in the face about planning conferences. But zooming back into the world of safe. If you take the notion that leading safe becomes leading essential safe, and then the SPC staying at that same kind of level is living in the essential safe land of launch arts, right? And instead of paying lip service, because what it's kind of doing at the moment, it just can't fit everything in. So it drops a little bit of portfolio and it drops a little bit of large solution in. Not nearly enough time to teach them at anything like a level of something as expensive an SPC course. You could take that time back and really give yourself time to double down on the stuff that's important down at that essential level. And then you've got to argue that you start to think about, well, that probably means you've got an equivalent of the SPC course oriented at the portfolio level.
So, I mean, for me, that the main question is, what problem do we want to solve with whatever course we're teaching? And like, I was reading Zone to Win this week, because you pointed that out last week. Yep. And now I read it in a complete different way than before. And I really have to reread some of the things. Now, why do I say that now? Because like, for me, there is a complete different problem to solve with Zone to Win, like a problem that I actually have never addressed in any safe course that I taught, because actually I was not aware that this is, or the depth of the problem that Zone to Win actually points out. Now I have read the book partially in the past, but Actually, like I was more primed by, okay, this is a part of the safe portfolio. Now, when you look at the book in more depth, then it's like, okay, it addresses a complete different problem that what we usually address in teaching portfolio stuff. And the same is true for like, what would we do with Essential Safe? Now, Essential Safe was a brilliant idea like 12 years ago when a lot of large companies had a lot of Scrum teams and they had a hard time to orchestrate their Scrum teams. Now then, Essential Safe was really a way out. Like, okay, now we can cram 10 to 12 teams in an agile release train and we can steer the whole thing out of the box with PI plannings and other stuff. Now, is that really a problem that most of the companies have today? I would argue there are a couple of companies, and there will be in the future, which are not yet on the safe track or on the scaled agile track, and they want to know about that. So there will be for sure several years into the future companies who need that material, but the majority of the companies don't have that problem that we are addressing with Essential Safe anymore. So the question is, who do we cater to? Is it the
Assuming
companies
that
who
you're
have
talking
safe?
about the majority of the companies are the ones trying to build electric vehicles or MRI machines.
I would argue 80 to 90% of the companies I talk to need to care more about Essential Safe than anything else right now.
I would completely agree.
Okay, I'm going with that. Now the question is, for me, the question is it really that they need an idea of how to like steer a couple of like 10 or 12 agile teams? Like we are teaching Essential Safe for them to learn it the right way and to do it better than they are doing right now. So this is the one thing that we could do it for. The other thing is they did something and then they started to deviate from the safe path, and probably they didn't know enough to customize it properly. Now they are stuck somewhere. And if this is the problem, and for me at least, the majority of companies go in that direction that I work with, then the question is it the right way to teach them Essential Safe again, saying, hey, you're deviating in ways that are not benefiting you from the safe framework? Or like, was it in the first place that they needed something else than what safe was providing, but there is nothing else, so they took safe, then they deviated from that, and it's still the same issue that they have, meaning that they are not really like that they would need something different. Now we are teaching them again, do safe the right way, and maybe things get better because they had a certain learning curve. Now they know better. Now they understand more why safe is the way it is, but it's still, they still have the same problems that made them deviate in the first place. Does that make sense, or am I completely...
Hey Mark, go left. Go left on the share.
Done. Here's something Eric prepared earlier.
Something I have in a deck from like 5 years ago. This talk is 6 years old now, or 5.5 years old. Crazy thinking about it. But I think what I started having a whole bunch of reactions, Wolfgang, as you were talking all over the map. I'm like, and one of them was like, well, when's the last time you worked with a company that's still doing project-based resource assignment into projects and has no teams, has no concept of standing teams yet? And I'm like, and then I'm like, oh wait, we're just optimized and working at different stages along the journey. And like I heard you describe part late 2, big chunks of 3 and elements of 4. Like, and arguably a lot of the portfolio management stuff is 3 and 4 for a lot of companies. You got to start to figure it out, but until you have a large majority of your investments flowing, you can't start optimizing your portfolio properly. You can kind of use it to contain the mess instead of generating flow and optimizing and rebalancing and stuff. And I'm like, wow, I've spent a lot of time with groups in 1 and 2 in the last while. Where it's like, Essential Safe is really stuff all you do in phase 1. because even if you have your executives all in and they want to do the big thing, you got to figure out what breaks when you do that. And that is the gritty train work. Go launch a train and see what happens, and then launch a few more trains that break the things on purpose so that you can fix your enterprise systems and your policies, and then you can start to scale.
I think
So,
for
yeah, Mark.
me, I used to always want to tune, right? I wanted to jump in and go, let's be context sensitive. And I was always very aggressive with the tweaking and tuning. And a great example would be, our first train, the one where I was coaching Em and her teams. We never did PI planning, right? And, every definition under the sun would say if you're not doing PI planning, you're not doing safe. We got a lot of value out of safe. PI planning was just not an appropriate answer to us. We went crazy with flow optimization, and really taking the leading principles to tune, and it really worked for us. And I generally then, every time I looked at a train, I would, safe's a great place to start. Let me tweak. And Dean would always have arguments with me about what scaled. And the first time I started to do, enterprises were rolling out beyond that kind of 1 or 2 trains with hyper care from really experienced coaches, right, was where I realized the big value of something like Essential Safe, because, we went into one place, and first train we launched, we did a lot of tweaking, right? We went, where are you? What are you capable of doing? What are you not capable of doing? Okay, we'll tweak this, we'll live with that for now, and we'll fix that later, right? And these are the things we'll do.
Yeah.
And then we turned around, and 3 more trains had launched elsewhere in the organization, and they'd all copied exactly the same tweaks we'd made for the first one. Because they'd looked and they went, oh, that's the way you do safe at our world. And they had assumed that our contextualizations were organizational rather than situational. And it's where I think the strength of Essential Safe is just to go, stick to the rails until you know how to get off the rails. And there's a truth that says there's an incredible number of organizations who still just need to stick to the rails. And that's where Essential Safe's brilliant.
So
that version.
So I like Essential Safe. It's not that I have anything against Essential Safe, but like when, say, hypothetically, there is someone who wants to do a software project, and then this guy comes to you, asks about a software project and what to do, and then you say, okay, probably you should have a standardized operating system for the people who are contributing, maybe a Windows platform. And he says, oh yeah, we have Windows XP machines still in the cellar, so we can use that. So this may be a good idea of standardization, because Windows XP was, at the time it was the main operating system in the world. It was not that bad. But now in 2023, I would not recommend Windows XP. Now the question is, like, we are talking about a solution that is more than 10 years old, and it didn't really change the core. Is it still valid? Of course, Windows is still a valid operating system, and a lot of what we have in Windows 11 stems from Windows XP. So would I still recommend Windows XP? Probably not. Probably I would recommend something that is more contemporary, because we know a lot more now about information technologies, operating systems, and all this stuff. So yes, it's a good idea. Like when I taught basics of information technology at the university, I love to teach that. Then I'm just stripping everything down to the most basic principles, like what is an electron and what is an electromagnetic field, what is a semiconductor, and whatever. Now, this helps the students to learn in an abstract way of what actually happens when you're building a computer. Now, usually the people who are going into a training are not interested in the theory behind it. They want to have something that they can take with them and apply right away. And then I would say, yes, essential safe is still valid and the principles still apply, but is it really the latest, like top-notch knowledge that we have to teach to people who really want to take something meaningful, like practical, out of a training? And so I would
You're
say,
sharing your Discord, Mark.
Good point. Thank you.
so I mean, we can, but is that really the thing that I would like to do? So I personally would like to give the people things that I didn't know back then, which really helped me in standardizing their world in a better way.
So make that tactical. What is that thing today in safe?
You mean the thing that we know more about than back
So-
then?
So in steering away, right? Let's imagine that we're not talking about dynamic agility and the stuff that's not in safe, right?
Yep.
Because today's discussion is staying within the boundaries of safe. What's a better way of re-architecting their courses?
Yeah.
Right. So if you imagine that safe doesn't have solution areas, because it doesn't.
It doesn't. It doesn't really matter.
And
I
it
don't
doesn't
need
have
it.
planning conferences, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Um,
and this is fine by me.
it's got teams, trains, portfolios, solution trains.
Yep, absolutely.
So zoning back in.
Yep. So I mean,
what
the problem that
do
we
you
have.
teach? What do
Yeah.
you teach to get people moving and evolving if it's not essential safe?
From my point of view, there is a much bigger problem that we have in implementing safe from a practical point of view than chapter 12 with large solutions. And I'm with you. It's by far not enough what we teach about large solution, but there is a part in safe which is actually a part of chapter 4, which is much worse, much worse. And this is the point of realignment. We have exactly 4 slides on realignment in implementing safe, meaning we have a whole emphasis of alignment with a whole process model of how to set about API planning and create alignment in the first place. Now we have usually, at least from what I experienced, we have PIs of 12 weeks, like 6 sprints. And this is the usual cadence in the company because it matches to quarters. Now, that means that we have to realign a lot more often than what we may have to realign in the past. Now we have 4 slides, one on system demo, one on art sync, product owner sync, and coach sync, and then like a general thing. But it's this is something that the people need a lot more guidance on, a lot more, because realignment is not something.
So let's slow you down for a second, right? Because where we started this was we went, if we took out extraneous content, we'd make more space to add deeper content.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you take something like realignment, and it's pretty easy to deal with that in standard safe. If you get a little bit more sophisticated the way you talk about framing a scrum of scrums or a coach sync to deal with different topics, and actually being a lot more explicit about train level realignment on sprint boundaries, if you get a lot deeper into effective backlog refinement, right? But at the moment, you haven't got time. You've only got that number of slides because you're trying to squeeze in a kind of dip your toe in the water with LPM and a dip your toe in the water with large solution, right? And that was where this whole discussion went, was, you know, if you took that out, right, and if you went back to just it's essential safe, you basically bought yourself 3 to 4 hours of content that you could amplify within the space of essential safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be a real, it would really be beneficial to, but then you also had to say something to large solutions later on, like, or whatever, like the things that you're taking out, you have to offer at least another course. For LPM, it's not a problem because there is a course and people can turn to it if they want to know more. But for large solution, there is no course. This is essentially the only material that we have. Of course, there's a toolkit that you could download, but the toolkit doesn't really give you a lot more depth.
With that, why do we have to have another course? Can we just solve one problem better instead of trying to have one course that doesn't really solve any of the problems? I'd arguably rather leave large solution completely unsolved and let people figure it out on their own based on having a better understanding of the train level.
Yeah. I would love the idea of throwing a lot of things out and bringing in other stuff. And yes, to have a better, like to emphasize essential safe more, to give the people more guidance on how to properly set up HR release trains in the way safe thinks it's the best way. That would help, absolutely. But for me, there is still that gap saying, hey, is that like, is that really the latest knowledge when we are setting up trains? And I don't mean with solution areas or anything. It's just like trains per se. And I would argue
I completely agree. You could put a whole bunch of extra content in there to get better trains. And that's usually the content that I wind up drawing on the whiteboard or going, here's my alternative deck. Because there's so much extra stuff. You just don't have time. So if we threaded that needle, coming back to, and I'm starting to like the overlays. If you threaded the needle that went, we've stripped leading safe down to being leading essential safe, and we've paralleled the SPC course to sit at that level. Before we head off into LPM land, I'm interested, Eric, in when you overlaid this on your flight levels, you had the SPC course at a lower flight level than leading essential safe.
Arguably, it's like same level, it's just the picture doesn't make it clear. Contextually, I see the people that are coaching as navigating and influencing the behaviors at the intersection of the two flight levels. Where I see the leaders sitting conceptually in the middle flight level more often than not, unless you're talking about truly line level individuals. So Wolfgang, I would argue that large solution is completely in the bottom two circles, 100%.
Yes, same.
I wouldn't put it at the intersection up there.
No, large solution has nothing to do with the strategy level.
I would question whether LPM is actually in the strategy circle.
Well,
like
that
it's the interface.
That was the place I wanted to go next because I
anyway,
I wanted to double check on your leveling down below before we headed up LPM wise.
But when I talk about leading essential safe, what's in my head thinking about this is purely 100%. How do I create an incredible release train? For all the things end to end around one release train, how does it operate? What's the by the book understanding of the principles, values, the flow characteristics, and the constructs of teams and trains? And maybe we could even get back to teaching some of the flexibility around things like, well, a feature doesn't have to be a work package. It can actually be an experiment. It could be an idea to pursue for 2 quarters or for 2 months or whatever.
Like
And
it'd be
build
so
a
nice
box
to have
that's just run a great train.
have a section on employing team topologies when you think about how to structure your train.
Yeah, perfect.
Ah.
Well, or maybe that's a side effect of the flow conversation.
Yeah, probably ties in pretty well.
Because what I realized is, and it actually took me embarrassingly perhaps long time to get anything resembling leading safe courseware on my screen, so I could actually look at it. And I'm not sure I'm there yet because I've got the trainer guide, and that's apparently all I'm allowed to download now. But like what I see is there's just not anything in the courseware now that is a comprehensive coverage of how to run a good release train.
No.
And maybe maybe I expressed myself a little bit, how should I say, with the wrong words in the first place. But like a brilliant, I'm with you. Having a course for a brilliant agile release train would be really a blessing, and we don't have it. But with just the means that SAFe provides to setting up an agile release train, I would argue that you will not come up with a brilliant agile release train. Not in most of the cases, even though you may teach it, like you may teach every time how to run proper, I don't know, coaches syncs, PO syncs, whatever, how to run the PI and whatever. There are reasons why people deviating. And usually, most of the people who are deviating don't have a lot of knowledge to deviate in the right way. So they are just deviating and more or less fall back into project management because this is what they knew, what they have grown up with. Now, if you just teach the SAFe things over and over again, maybe the people will understand more, but the need for deviating will not go away. Because we are not good in SAFe in contextualizing that. Of course, we can teach the basics over and over again, but that would be like I'm teaching semiconductors over and over again. It doesn't really help the people to program anything on Windows. It's like it's an essential thing, and people should understand that. And the more they understand it, the better probably they can deviate from that over time. But the problem is the people are not deviating because they are dumb in the first place, because they didn't get SAFe in the first place. They may even like when they were in leading SAFe or SPC class, they may get what SAFe wants them to do, but they have a need to deviate. And they don't have the experience to deviate properly, but the need for deviating is still there. And so just repeating the SAFe things over and over without giving the people something that matches their need to deviate will probably never stop and train.
Where are you getting over and over? We're talking the first introduction people have to what they are. Like I'm hearing Shuhari here, like you're saying the course has to make them read. And it's like, no, they have to get it and try it and see what breaks. And feel like they have permission to explore and extend. But a 2-day course isn't gonna teach people how to remix and remaster anything ever. No. And frankly, that's a level of skill and evolution that I don't even put most of the SBCTs having.
No.
To be able to do that on the fly reliably.
And to be brutally honest, most of the people that I see who get into trouble don't get into trouble because SAFe got them into trouble. They get into trouble because their interpretation of SAFe got them into trouble.
Mark, your level is really low.
Yeah, absolutely. But still, there was a need to deviate. And the need for deviation is not, with most of the people that I worked with over the years, it's not going away. So
I guess what point are you trying to make relevant to the course structure?
Of the SAFe official courses.
I mean,
just being structured in our conversation, because we have weeks where we are everywhere but in the official world of SAFe. Right now, we're staying in the official world of slides that might appear in an official certified SAFe course, as opposed to Wolfgang or a Mark or an Eric value-added extra course.
And just to reframe this, slides that might be useful and valuable for an SPC to teach as they relaunch are working towards a release train.
Yeah.
Not SPCTs, not people playing at the portfolio level like 2% of our population does.
Yeah.
But for the bulk of the engineers and engineering leaders and product people that are trying to just get stuff done in an enterprise that might be adopting SAFe, how do we make their job, that cohort, easier with the resources they have available and the humans they have available around them?
So essentially what you said, Eric, would be like we have all these slides in the toolkits, in the workshops, in the trainings. And couldn't we, with this slide material that we have and not inventing a lot more slides, couldn't we put together a course that helps the people much better in setting up HR release trains? Would that be the challenge?
Yeah, to me, it's staying within. If you think it's staying within canon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, all of us vary from canon in some of our own work, but if you stay within canon, I think there's always been sort of. If you go right back to the beginning of SAFe, in the beginning of SAFe, you couldn't have something in a course that you couldn't find on the framework site, right? The whole notion of it was, you know, the framework's free. Yes, you might pay for the course, but actually, there's nothing you'll see in a slide in a course that you couldn't also see on the framework if you click the mouse button.
Yeah.
But then there came a moment in time when the courses started to have content that went well and truly beyond what was on the framework.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, that became actually, to an extent, part of the framework's iteration and evolution process. You know, SAFe for architecture, Eric, I'm almost certain there's a whole bunch of content in SAFe for architects that you wouldn't find if you clicked through every article on the website.
About half of it.
Yep, right. Because and it's still in canon, but it's extending, contextualizing, and illustrating, right, at serious depth for a particular audience. Likewise, if you go to Agile software engineering,
Yep.
Agile product management, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's quite legitimate now to have a course that goes, I'm going to stay in canon, but I know that I'm on a particular target audience, and I can go to a level of depth in illustration and contextualization that isn't going to happen on scaleagileframework.com. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there if you narrow, and this is what I love about the idea of going, it's leading essential SAFe, or it's SPC essential, is in giving up the stuff that at the moment is kind of there just as a, you know, we had to say something about this. You make space to start to go deeper, and you've actually got time to add that deep contextual content to these courses.
I love the idea.
And you know, I mean, I even look at it and I go, I love the idea of the one-day bootstrap course as well, because if you do the one-day bootstrap course, that buys you even more time to make an amazing leading essential SAFe course.
Mm-hmm.
Because you take really 4 hours of content that is pretty much copy-paste content in half the SAFe courses, and you go, that's in the precursor course.
Precursor boot course would have the 5-slide edition on what is a release train.
Yeah.
And then in the course you can actually get into talking about why you're setting up for flow, how you shape your teams, how you build release, and how they collaborate in real time throughout the iterations and not just through these 4 events that we give a page, 1 slide each to.
Yeah.
For realignment. So.
Did I already say today that I really love these conversations? Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Because I just looked through the courseware and it's like, okay, 5 slides on standing up, like not even standing up, 5 slides on what is a release train. It's cross silo, it has 50 to 125 people, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then we jump over into basically introductory train level product management and talk about customer centricity for a while. And then we talk about prioritization and backlog management. Then we talk about PI planning. Mm-hmm. And now we're like, and that's interesting because like we basically spend a third of that chunk, 2/3 of that chunk on 2 days of the PI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And that's very much the way it's weighted now, is, you know, making your train run.
Because the more I look at it, God.
I was just going to say, because it's so fresh in my head from this week's balance, is how much of leading safe feels weighted towards PI planning. And, you know, I was chatting to the class this week going, you know, it's funny because once upon a time, when you taught this stuff, PI planning was big and scary.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody reacted to PI planning, you know, put that many people in the room, how expensive, how scary, blah, blah, blah. And that's no longer the case, right? Whether you're doing safe or something else, people are doing big room planning,
mm-hmm.
right? It's a given if you're doing something at scale, you're going to be doing some kind of big room planning. It's no longer something you've got to sell. You're just going, this is how we do it in safe.
You could build a class or a deep toolkit workshop that is teaching people how to run effective PI plannings in a 2-day format.
Yeah.
And it's stuff from Advanced Scrum Master, RTE, and Leading Safe.
Yeah.
But I would still stay with that point that I made before, saying we are not teaching the people how to deviate properly. So I had that revelation when I once taught an RTE course. I did the RTE course. The chapter 4 is all about PI planning. And this chapter 4 is more like a process model. Yes, you can deviate from that if you have remote PI plannings or whatever, but it's a good process and you could follow the process. Now, when you go to chapter 5, and chapter 5 is about executing the PI, it's actually not a process anymore. It's just a bunch of ideas. And when I taught that to the people in the class, saying, hey, you know, chapter 4 is a process model. Chapter 5 is a bunch of ideas which you have to shape yourself in your context. Then it was much clearer to the people how to tackle the slides. Now, this is something that we are not even mentioning, saying what is essentially really a process model, like the PI planning and other things. What is a bunch of ideas that we are showing you, and you have to contextualize that right from the beginning, because we're not giving you enough information so that it might work out with just the information that we're giving you. So like,
ultimately what you're talking about is the original tension between the Kanban method and Scrum.
Yeah, in a way, yes.
And like, I don't think like safe as a framework and safe as a business, Scaled Agile as a business is a very strong philosophy embedded into their culture, and that is part of their business model about where they sit on that spectrum. Like, yeah, I mean, Dean will say on stage, it's not legislation, change it as you need to. But they will, if they change, I would be stunned if they ever change away from their content, their courses being aimed at the 2-level practitioner that's trying to learn the basics of this.
Yeah.
And so I guess what I'm hearing, like my filter as I'm hearing you talk is, what would you do in that construct, in that ethos, to give people permission without confusing them? Because there will always be a script. There will always be a default behavior embedded into the safe content. Otherwise, it wouldn't be safe anymore.
The easiest way to teach people to deviate in a proper way would be to say, apply at least the principles from lean startup to your organizational development, saying if you're deviating from the standard, formulate a hypothesis, find leading indicators, measure, and have time boxes where you can steer. This is usually what doesn't happen. So people are deviating. They may even know that they are deviating from the standard, but it's not time bound. It's not measured. It's not what is actually the reason why we are deviating and what is the hypothesis, what we are getting out, what we are doing better if we are deviating. So if you would just do that.
So you're saying teach PDCA as part of the lean principles and remind people it exists?
In a way, yes, but in a much deeper way, giving them examples, giving them something that they can really match to their everyday life. Like just a couple,
So independent of the courseware, independent of this courseware discussion, I kind of want to sit down and sketch out what a 2-hour learning module would be on safely tailoring safe. Like teaching people the skills of how to think about evolving the framework as a learning module. Like we could build that course and sell it just as a quick thing, independent of anything Scaled Agile does. And I don't think they'd even be upset.
I would actually say personally that I would title that course "How to Tailor Safe Without Tailoring Safe."
Yeah.
Yeah, conceptually, yeah.
And I mean, don't get me wrong, right? Because I don't think that safe is the cure for world hunger. There are problems that there are better tools for, and there are certainly problems that there are better tools for than trains. But I think a lot of the time, it's what are the tools that are there that you're not using, and I think it kind of goes back to your big speech about Windows 95, Wolfgang. Whenever we talk about technical agility, I go, well, this is the thing my team was doing back in 2006. Right? We ran BDD, TDD, CI/CD. You know, we didn't have cloud, and the end of our CD pipeline burnt CD images. But if you joined my team and you didn't do these core things in terms of test data management, test automation, pipeline integration, you know, code quality, then you weren't going to last long on my team, right? And that was nearly 20 years ago. And most of my enterprise clients reaching that standard is an unimaginable height.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of techniques that have been there for a long time and haven't changed for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just that people haven't really mastered them. And I think
Give me
for
one
me,
second, I'll be right back.
sometimes it's actually being a lot more explicit, almost more prescriptive. So I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to switch the screen share because the boys are off getting coffees and things, right? So I had a funny moment this week, right? Because, you know, it's the first time I've taught an SPC course since 2020. And you know, there's that module in it where it goes, here's the 13 questions on the PI readiness checklist. Have you got an RTE? Have most of your teams got members? And you put them through the exercise of going, you know, yes, no, depends. And I always have a bit of fun with that one because I've launched trains. Every one of those questions, I've launched a train where the answer was no. And got away with it. I just haven't ever launched one where the answer was no to all of them. But looking at that kind of the 13 questions for readiness, this is my readiness checklist.
Yeah.
And my readiness checklist is like, you know, do we know our features? To what level, right? About all our features, do we know which team's taking lead, which other teams are involved? Have we got some clue of the estimate? Have we got clarity on the intent? Do we know what the MVP of the feature might be? Have we got a clue what potential scope challenges might be? Are there all change impacts? Do we know how we're going to deployment batch it? Are there going to be
I really love
any surprises for stakeholders? Do we have a map that actually looks holistically across each feature to go which teams and which suppliers are involved for which features, and to what level are they ready?
Yeah.
Have they had discovery workshops? Have they had a chance to get their head around what the feature is? You know, have we got a clue what our capacity is going to be? Have we agreed our guardrails? Checklist upon checklist upon checklist for all the stuff we want to do for the venue and getting ready to have guests and teams being ready to walk into the room and vision speeches and state of the roadmap. And, you know, my readiness checklist just goes on and on and on. And at the end of the day, it's you know, what do you do after you've done 200 or 300 PR plannings? You go, these are all the things you want to think about. And there's one level where you're going, well, I'm now being way more prescriptive. Right? It's not 13 questions with a yes or no answer. There's another level where it's going, here's far more detailed guidance to help you prepare for a great PR planning.
Yeah.
And I think there's areas in terms of, you know, how you're approaching designing your teams for the train.
Mhm.
Right? How you're selecting your product owners and scrum masters. You know, there's all kinds of places where you could add a lot more guidance without actually going away from safe. And that guidance gives them a much more likely chance of success.
So I love that, being much more prescriptive on certain things, because my experience is that a lot of the people don't really have a good gut feeling of what is really necessary and what not. Where can I deviate without harming the whole implementation, and where should I better stay to what is written down? And this alone, like giving them what I'm usually teaching is, I say every item on the big picture has at least one feedback loop that it is part of, and it has at least one benefit hypothesis while it's there. So when you think about like not having an RTE, then the question is, which feedback loop are you breaking and which benefit are you not getting? And so if you would teach it in that way, like at that point in time, I would say historically, coming from Scrum, we are still in a safe but culture, like a Scrum but culture, saying, yeah, I'm doing Scrum, but I'm not doing retrospective or something. I'm doing safe, but I don't have an RTE. Now, in Scrum but makes a lot more sense, because you could always say, hey, why doesn't it make sense to meet once in a while and talk about what we will do the next weeks, or sit down and reflect what we have done. But in safe, as it's a lot, like it's huge, like 120 people in a train, it's a lot more normal that you have to deviate. If you want to have a great train, then you have to make sure that you are deviating in the right way from what is written down. Of course, there should be things which you're strict on, because people usually don't have a good feeling, as I said, for why is that so important, and which feedback loop would I break if I'm not doing that. But as long as we are taking deviations as like a part of the devil's path, then we will probably never set up great HR release trains, because deviation, at least from my point of view, is something that should be baked in a good HR release train. I don't know. It's just my opinion.
Wait, we're saying anything here that's more than just our opinions?
It's all opinions.
So keep coming back. Maybe I wonder if this is a self-limiting belief I have, but I love the voiceover that I add to training, and I have a high opinion of the additional benefits I provide people when I teach. But I also have a mental block that I just don't fundamentally believe that packaged training out of the box can provide gut feelings. It can't take people to that higher level by default across the board with a random set of 3,000 instructors delivering it.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's not possible, but it's as like what we do in informatics usually. If things become more complex, we are adding an additional layer of indirection, and this is what we are doing. It's still a process. Like you could say, hey, if you deviate, follow the guidance from Lean Startup. This is still a process. Then you can deviate, but you still have a process to deviate from. Like, write down a benefit hypothesis, find leading indicators, measure, steer. So these are things that everyone can teach, and everyone can teach in the same way. So the only thing is that we're saying, hey, sometimes you will not find the answer on the level of the framework. Sometimes you have to add a layer of indirection. But deviation is not something that you are just doing because you're feeling like it. Deviation has a process to it. And this is what is completely missing from my point of view.
So if you thought about the last 100 features that you've looked at clients, Wolfgang, what percentage of them had a clear benefit hypothesis that was then measured in terms of outcomes?
No, I wouldn't say it's not zero, but it's probably not a lot. So I would stay with 15 to 10%, something like that.
So that's I think, and I think this is where you always get into, you know, back to Eric's comment, right? When you're thinking about safe training and the basics here, you know, the challenge of the nuance is people's ability to leverage the nuance. And what's the journey that gets them to the point where they can leverage the nuance? You know.
Is that, yeah, absolutely. So there is a lot about the nuance, but and of course, like if you have a brilliant organizational architect, probably this guy can do miracles, whereas someone with the same guidance, the same training will do just poor work. But from my point of view, it's like, of course, there is a certain skill or talent also needed in organizational architecture. But it's not that we cannot teach that. Like, this was a revelation that I really had, and it's a couple of decades ago. So this was when I wanted to study music, and there was like a melody from a choir that Johann Sebastian Bach wrote, and we just had the melody, and we had to set up all the other voices. And I thought back then I'm not that bad in like setting out the other voices. And so I wrote the choir down, and then the teacher handed me the original from Johann Sebastian Bach, and I was just blown away. It was like, okay, I will probably never be able to compose something like that, because he followed all the rules, all the rules of setting out voices, but it was completely different, and it was so much more brilliant. So, but there is still, I think, something that, how should I say, a benefit in teaching the principles, even though this was much more brilliant with the same principles.
I don't think we're saying don't teach the principles.
No.
At all. I think we need more time on the principles and how they apply in a narrow context of a training.
Exactly, and this is the thing, Eric. At least from my point of view, like, how do I apply the principles? Of course, I can say, hey, take an economic view, but what does that mean in reality? I mean, how does that help me to deviate from the standard in a certain way, or like to fill it with life on my own?
What if we did a reframe here? Instead of saying so I don't think in terms of deviating from the standard ever, because I don't think of safe as a standard.
Okay.
So like the language even bothers me a little bit. Just a second, it's telling me it's going to log me out of my share. Weird. But I don't even think of safe as a standard. I think of it as a library of tools that are pre-configured that you can then adapt if you need to. So like this idea of deviation as if it is a skill, like knowing how to remix the tools is an important skill, crucial to delivery, no question in my mind. But I think from a training and an education point of view, I would rather start with, here is why the things are made the way they are relevant to the principles. Like instead of saying, well, we need to deviate from how we do prioritization, why don't we instead teach a little more on the connection between WSGIF and economic framework, and between the ideas of flow and how having effective flow in different teams and specialization balanced with generalization influence is a derivative of clear principles.
It's one of the
places so that you know why you're doing the thing you're doing.
I think, actually, I'm going to add a note on that one. It's one of the places I think you could get, again, benefit from this separation is, the number of times when I'm teaching in the practice part of a leading safe that I'll go, oh, this is embrace variability in action, or this is your economic framework.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you see it and you go, well, I spent a lot of time talking about principles yesterday. Now we're in a practice, I'm going to just link it back. But actually, rarely does the slide where in there go, this is the linkage to the principle. It's actually one of the
training notes either.
It's one of the reasons why I don't get to teach it very often, but I love the architecture of the Advanced Scrum Master course. Right? Because the Advanced Scrum Master course basically goes, let's take a principle and let's challenge you to think about your team through the lens of the principle. Right?
Yeah.
Let's take another principle. Let's challenge you to think about your team through the lens of that principle. So that clear and explicit linkage to principle is really powerful. And again, I think if you took that, we'd separated out the bootstrap course. One of the ways you buy time, because if you think about, and the speech always on the principles is, if you're going to have to tune it, if you're going to contextualize, if you're going to change something, if you know the principle that the practice is there to fulfill, then you can contextualize effectively, because you can find an alternative practice that fulfills the same principle. But if you don't understand the principle that drove it, you haven't got much chance of effectively adapting it.
But from my point of view, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from my point of view, we are then one level higher. We are not arguing then anymore on the level of the frameworks themselves or the methods coming with the framework, but we are saying, hey, this is a toolbox, and now we have to teach you how to apply that like toolbox or the tools in the toolbox to the situation that you have. And this is something that we never do in SAFe. We never get this level of indirection in the slides. Of course, we can do that ourselves in the voiceover, but in the slides, there's nothing mentioned of that. It's always on the level of the tools and the framework.
And I think that's probably the difference, if you think about it, is we love the voiceovers because we do that in our voiceovers.
Yeah.
When we're talking about improving the material to be taught by the masses, how do you give the material that voiceover?
And I believe, really, I believe very strongly right now, maybe not tomorrow, but to this week, I believe very strongly that if we add another layer of indirection, we can teach that also. Like, we can give them the tools, say, okay, this is what we are doing, PI planning, sync coach, whatever, refinement, inspect and adapt. Now, and here are the guidelines, the principles, or the process model to apply these things to your situation. Now, come up with a benefit hypothesis, like a PI planning. What is the benefit that you think, what benefit would you have from installing a PI planning? How would you know that you got that benefit? Like, how do you measure? If it's not giving you the benefit, so how would you steer the whole thing in a different direction? So modified or ramp it down, replacing through something else. And also the customer centricity part, like thinking in the first place about what are the communication and collaboration needs that we want to address, because hardly any organizational architect that I worked with ever thought about that in the first place, because there's the framework and we are thinking on the level of the framework. So we just have to apply what is written. But like the customer aspect of what we are doing is one level higher. It's like, if we are thinking about what the needs are, then we can use the tools in that toolbox to the benefits of like addressing the needs. And I'm completely convinced that we can teach that, and that would make a brilliant agile release train, not staying on the level of the framework itself.
Can you go back to the 3 share? Because it's what you just described, Wolfgang, is in SAFe explicitly.
Yeah.
And it's not, I'm sharing it right now, but it's, or I put it on the Miro.
Oh, sorry, I haven't hit the transition button, sorry. I've got to wire in hitting that transition button. I decided I was sick of looking at the green, empty Saahil box.
Yeah. Or honestly, with the macros, you may not need the transition button as much anymore. You might just wire it to go direct and stay out of studio mode.
Quite possible.
Yeah, you might, a 1-touch might be enough for instinct now instead of a 2-touch. But it's like the thing, and this is where I will agree with you all, showing the evidence that counters your discussions. SAFe says this is exactly what you should do.
Yeah.
But from a how they teach it point of view, they choose not to put that level remixing skill set, exploring alternatives, into all the courseware. And frankly, can you imagine trying to take a course which is like, and this is what a backlog is, and here's 14 different ways you arrange backlogs, and here's 7 different meanings of features, and like, how?
and this is what I think, if I reread Switch recently. Sometimes when I'm coaching and I say, please read, I do a refresher myself so that I can remember to ask the right questions. And one of the points they make in Switch is that if you've got too many choices, it's paralyzing.
Yeah, it is.
And I think...
Can you share my screen when you have a second after this topic?
I can share it, in fact, right now. It's tempting for us because we love to tweak and nuance and, you know, option stuff, to go, oh, here's a million different ways, but it is actually paralyzing for clients. And I think I've seen in a number of roll your own agile rollouts in traditional enterprises, they've published guidelines and said, roll your own. And what people have done is found a way to not change the way they work at all while still interpreting it as fulfilling the new guidelines. Because of, and I think a lot of it boils back to that, you know, the paralysis of choice. The hard, if there's too many options, it's too hard to move. Eric, talk us through your slide.
So I was just thinking, like, I start to think about the different places I've created alternatives for people. And this is one that jumped up as like, oh, how we plan and execute features is different depending on the nature of the feature. And this started as a whiteboard drawing in Lexington, Kentucky, I believe. I remember which client. It was either Lexington or it might have been their Bay Area office. But like I tried to explain, like, here's what's the meta behind how you pick features. And this is pre-safe. Like this was the year I was learning safe was the year I was helping them. And I got like most of the way through helping them. I'm like, oh no, by the way, all that stuff we talked about, you could probably do safe now. And it's a framework that will help you do all that stuff. But I was trying to explain how to think about features from a business and product management point of view. And it's like, well, you've got this set of stuff you already do. You've got a bunch of things based on your strategy that you might want to go do that you think your customers want to do. And you have a set of objectives that you use to anchor that for the organization so that they can pursue it. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's kind of the customer market layer of a feature. And now let's look in the middle and say, cool, so here's what your current platform product, whatever, I was talking platforms back there, can do. Here's the things you think you need to do. Clearly, you need to do some features to make these objectives come real. That's where features fit. And then you bundle those into offers, and then as you build those, you can sell more things, and they become part of your current offer set. So that's the financial go-to-market approach on the right. And then that was just a basic picture to help people explain how features fit. And then I'm like, but there's a lot of different ways features show up. And if you try to make it one size fits all, and this is where their heads exploded. Because they're like, we can't handle this. And you guys are looking at this like, yeah, maybe this makes sense. You probably are arguing with maybe number 6 or maybe all of them should be more like 7 instead of 5. And you're probably starting to slice through this without even me explaining it. But this was too much for people to pull in while they're still trying to figure out what a feature is and where it fits. And I ended up drawing some pictures and saying, well, for most of the things I'm hearing, you've got a couple big ones that I'm hearing you express these 2 dynamics, but most of the stuff is probably 1, 2, and 3 for you. And they're like, okay. And then once they had the decision rule, this whole thing became much easier for them to understand and start to apply. But absent a decision rule, all of this flexibility was overwhelming. And that's the tightrope I'm thinking about. And then I drew interaction diagrams and iteration diagrams for how to write your stories for each one. But that's not part of the point I was making.
And I'm with you, Eric, and also with you, Mark, saying if we have too many choices, then probably we will not make, or we will not take the time or think about them deep enough to really make the right choice in every situation. So, but for me, like being strict on things, saying, hey, there is a PI planning, and this is really important, mandatory for creating alignment in the first place. Or there has to be some kind of retrospective at the end of the PI to make sure that we are learning from what we're doing. So I'm a big fan of being strict in certain areas. And in the first place, when we start a new HR release train, we should be strict in most of the things that we're saying. Like, this is how we do it. Let's do it like that. You don't have the experience right now, but believe me, this is at least to a certain degree beneficial for you, because it was beneficial to almost everyone else who implemented that. But to teach like customization right from the start, and not with a lot of things, but with a couple of things, like say with realignment, just with realignment. You have a bunch of things like PO sync, art sync, coaches sync, inspect and adapt, system demo, solution demo, and things like that. So let's write down hypotheses just about realignment. What would be the right realignment mechanism for us, at least for the next PI or the next 2 PIs? So to teach them that right up front helps them to get deeper into that over time.
So that's actually, as an easy example, Wolfgang, scrums. Right? So you know, if you look at the notion of the various syncs, it just takes a little bit of thinking to go, I might have different agendas for different Scrum of Scrums. And maybe the Scrum of Scrums on sprint planning day is actually a realignment event. Because in actual fact, that's what I teach a lot of trainers to do. At that point, you're not even doing anything except going, here's how to use this thing that Safe told you to do effectively. You don't have to add another concept. And I think that's the landscape of possibility for us.
And then I think the HR release train that comes out of that, like you have a really strong guidance in certain places, maybe in most of the places in the beginning, but you teach customization right up front. And the more the people know, the more they are able to customize according to certain customization rules or principles or whatever.
Yeah.
I think this is the recipe for great HR release trains.
It certainly, I add lots of prescriptive stuff when I launch a train. And then I go, when you'll realize you don't, there'll come a moment where you go, we don't need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
Right? So I add a mid-PI review. It's like a one-day workshop, middle of the PI.
Yep.
And I go, there'll come a PI, hopefully not too far away, where you look and you go, we don't need that because we know the answer to every question it asks. I go, fantastic, you don't need it anymore.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. I love that.
Unless they're saying that about their daily stand-up and they're just deluding themselves.
There's always that possibility.
So interestingly, I wonder, I want to steal a march from, I want to say Brave New Work. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. And it's the concept of organizational defaults, as opposed to saying something's prescriptive, which is to me an imposed process thou shalt follow. You do it this way, or clearly it breaks if you don't do it this way.
Yeah.
I'm happy with there being prescriptive approaches for managing nuclear reactors. I think that's a very good thing on our submarines and in our power plants. But most things I don't think need prescriptive. What if we started using more broadly the term default? So here's our default way of doing safe. If you don't have a good reason to do it differently, here's how we do it. And it's against this idea, and I'm crossing a whole bunch of different books here, but in the interest of dodging needless creativity, innovation that's not actually innovation. Like don't spend time reinventing things you don't have to. We have defaults that allow you to be quite successful. And when you feel like a default is no longer serving you, go back to principles, understand why, understand the benefits, and run an experiment. And then read out the results of your experiment to the rest of your organization. And if we could embed something like that into basic train behaviors, I found it to be so powerful in practice, even though I didn't have the words yet. I didn't use it this way back then. But one of the defaults I established at CA was, regardless of what process you are using, what methodology you are following, we don't actually care. But the one thing we will prescribe is that you will read out and provide your progress reporting to the chief product officer in the language of SAFE in terms of features and epics.
Mm-hmm.
That was a prescribed. There was a default that said, and behind the scenes, it's really easy to do that if you use SAFE and use the Rally tooling as configured and. But we didn't prescribe any of that. And all but one of the general managers went, well, that's easy enough, let's just do SAFE. And their trains went and launched themselves without the LACE having to do it. And I'm remapping all the words because we used completely different words back then. We were the BAT team, Business Agility Transformation Team.
Because who doesn't want to be a BAT team?
Yeah. But the providing of defaults plus a minimum set of requirements changed everything. And I think that might be more what you're getting at, Wolfgang, is providing the permission to change things and highlighting that these are just defaults and that there might be better ways, and you're welcome to experiment. But if you don't need to fix something, don't fix it. Go with the default because you have better things to focus on.
Yes, so I would go one step further. Like when you look at the Scrum framework, you could say Scrum is a kind of a meta process, because actually what you're doing in a Scrum team could be completely different from one team to another. Maybe you're doing hardware or software or whatever. Now you have a meta process saying, hey, we are meeting once in a while to talk about what we want to do, and we are meeting once in a while to reflect on what we did and things. Now, we have a lot of these meta processes, like a PI planning would also be a meta process, because it's just like, hey, let's get the people together and let's talk about what we are actually doing. Now, there is a new, from my point of view, there is a new level emerging. For the last, I would say, 25 years, we were just exploring the level of the meta processes, like starting from extreme programming, Scrum, Less, and all the other things are all on the level of meta processes. Now we are one level higher, or like the next level, the next layer of indirection is emerging. And this is what I would call the level of meta frameworks. Like the meta processes are actually like the layer of frameworks. Now there is a new level emerging saying, hey, but we will probably not be process compliant in a larger transformation if we try to optimize like globally and locally at the same time. There will be certain variances over the whole body of people that we have. Now, if we go one level higher to the level of meta frameworks, and we are applying certain rules and principles to how to customize or tailor things, then we are actually getting in a different realm of thinking, so to speak. And what I would do in such a training would be to explicitly like separate the two, saying, hey, here we are talking about meta processes like frameworks. We're talking about what we could do in certain situations and what we could customize. And now we are talking about one level higher, how we could customize that, like a process or certain guardrails to how customization looks like in a proper world. And I think like in general, it's exactly what you said, Eric. It's just like I wouldn't just bring that in saying, hey, sometimes we have to apply, we have to look at the principles and try to apply the principles in a better way or something. It's really like the next level of agility from me. It's like the world of the meta frameworks is something that gives us a lot more freedom, yet staying process compliant, even in large organizations.
This is where I get back, like, from a methodologist point of view, I don't disagree with you at all. From a person who's trying to get the world to behave this way, like, I just turn off when you start talking that language.
Yeah. And to be honest,
and that's really what I'm trying to figure out is how do we enable success?
Yeah.
Because our number one goal through this training is not how do we teach the meta, not how do we frame it. There will be deep thinkers within each organization that I'm absolutely going to share that framing with and help them learn to see that. I would argue that most leaders through mentoring, I will be helping them get there. But it's not like we're talking about a 2-day training. We're talking about how do we introduce this framework to people to drive the best possible success at the team of teams level.
Yep.
Because we need that solid foundation if we're going to do all the other cool stuff that we want to do at the rest of the framework levels.
I'm with you.
Because the entire next conversation, maybe for next week or the week after, is and how do we get technical agility and good technical foundations back into the framework in various environments?
It's like for me, you know, we're talking about different flavors of epics this week in the SPC. We're talking about different flavors of epics this week in the SPC course. And I went, look, if you look at it theoretically, you've got portfolio epics and program epics and solution epics. And portfolio epics can get broken down into solution epics, and solution epics can get broken down into program epics. But by the same token, solution epics can get broken down into capabilities and bypass program epics. And, you know, if you like looking at entity diagrams, there's an entity diagram that maps all of this. But my experience was the one organization where I tried talking about 3 different flavors of epic, all I got was a very confused bunch of stakeholders and product managers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so I have a different talk I do on 3 flavors of epics that actually stuck pretty well, but it's a story.
Yep.
And it's not the type of epics you're talking about.
It's literally, I think, because it's very easy to sit there and go, this is something that's beautiful. Theoretically, if you're a methodologist or a really deep thinker, and while it might help us think, I think a lot of the stuff that excites us doesn't help our clients and doesn't help a lot of coaches.
Absolutely.
So I'm
and
sorry, go on, Wolfgang.
I'm completely with you that like the framing or how you teach that, what you draw on the slides has to be something that people can relate to. And like what I explained is probably, as you said, way too, how should I say, too thoughtful. I don't know what the right word is for that.
I pick esoteric.
Yeah, I love esoteric.
I love to start with esoteric, but then I want to make it useful for people.
Absolutely. It would be like differentiating between meta frameworks and meta processes would be something that would be a design principle for me for the course. It would probably not be something that I would write down in that form on the slides.
Not until
well, maybe a metaphor that we should think about is we're all very professorial. We have the opportunity to both teach first-year undergrads, and we have the opportunity to coach the pre-docs that are postdocs that are actually teaching assistants. We get the chance to coach our teaching assistants, and we get the chance to work with our PhD students, like our advanced ones. We should probably be clear on which one we're talking about as our cohort when we're being professors.
So basically, Eric, you're giving us a metaphor for the metas.
Yeah, I will meta metaphor. I might even find some catchy music that sings to, like I'm a chameleon, metaphor.
All right. It's 1:10. We've been going nearly 3 hours.
Good.
You're right.
It's been fun. So
it was.
So I'm going to put a wrap, right? We kind of framed the LPM off to one side. We didn't go near there. It felt like we all actually felt pretty solid on the idea of leading Essential Safe and a correlating SPC that was really focused on Essential Safe Great Arts. It also felt pretty solid when we talked about the kind of one-day bootstrap course. Really focusing in on the sort of safe principles, core values, you know, almost a slightly extended safe for executives. That would give you space in a lot of the other courses. And then we had this lovely thread of, you know, the explicit link of practice to principle, leveraging our space to be able to be more explicit there. The notion of the typical extensions and defaults, and that concept of if you don't have a good reason to change, do it this way, the default. But if you do have a reason to change, what's the experiment that would prove the value of shifting from the default? Lined up in Eric's flight levels diagram, the left side snowman with leading safe sitting squarely on essential safe sitting squarely on the coordination operations boundary. And I finally figured out why you had the SPC sitting there, Eric. because you are doing intersection of audiences as opposed to intersection of flight levels.
Yes, it was about helping people make that transition to where they're ready to coach into that second space.
And at that point, you're going, actually, I can see team coach, technical coach getting heavily involved there as a growth path.
If we don't try to make SBC about teaching everything, suddenly it becomes a very valuable thing for low-level coordinators in the system.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
and even perhaps line managers and
yeah,
I've always loved it when directors take implementing.
You can see all kinds of interesting stuff there.
The good news is nobody will do anything with this for years. And that means my programs are still quite useful.
Well, exactly. So I'm going to suggest we call it a wrap for the night.
Yeah, thank you really for your time, because I really love these conversations.
They are good fun.
And it helps me to think.
And just remember the meta for the metas. And have a great day, guys.
Yeah, enjoy.
Ciao.